I met my girlfriend's guy best friend for the first time, so now I've realized she's only with me because she can't be with him, and I think I'm just a placeholder until he becomes available. I, 29 meters, think my girlfriend, 26 feet, is only with me because she can't be with her best friend, 26 meters. Should I just end the relationship? I've been with my girlfriend Jordan for a little over 2 years. We live together and have 2 cats. Up until this weekend, I genuinely thought everything was perfect in our relationship, which I know is what everyone says in these posts, but I really was thinking about asking her to marry me sometime next year. We don't ever argue. Jordan is very sweet and easygoing, and we usually just mesh well on everything. Honestly, if things hadn't been so good up until now, I probably would have just broken up with her this weekend. But because things have truly been perfect, I'm not sure if I'm jumping to the wrong conclusion about what to do because my feelings got hurt. The other person who's important in this story is Jordan's friend Mark. She's known Mark her whole life because they both grew up in the same small religious community. Jordan isn't part of that religion anymore. She decided to leave the church when she was, I think, 19, and moved to the state we live in now. Mark is still part of the religion and apparently takes it really seriously. I'm told he now works for the church back in Jordan's hometown. As far as I know, Mark is the only person from her religious community Jordan still talks to, besides her parents, which I'm mentioning because I now think it could be a red flag. On Saturday, I met Mark for the first time because he was in our city, and Jordan wanted us all to have dinner together. At this point, I want to say, I'll admit that when we were first dating and I found out Jordan had a best friend who was a guy, I didn't like it, especially because they seemed to be on FaceTime a lot. But since he was a childhood friend and they mostly didn't see each other in person, I just trusted Jordan that Mark was only a friend. Eventually, I got over it. So, when we were going to dinner, I wasn't jealous or suspicious of Mark at all. If anything, I was somewhat excited to finally meet him since I've been hearing about him for 2 years. But the way Jordan and Mark acted at dinner convinced me that something is going on between them other than just being best friends. I honestly don't know how to describe it except to say I've never seen 2 people act more obviously like they were in love. They literally wouldn't stop touching each other. They were constantly touching each other's arms and shoulders, and at some points, they were actually holding hands. They completely left me out of the conversation, laughing about inside jokes, and every time they'd laugh, they'd put their foreheads together or hold hands. The way they looked at each other made me even more uncomfortable than the touching. It wasn't how someone looks at a person they're supposedly just friends with. I'm 100% sure every stranger looking at our table thought Jordan and Mark were the couple and that I was her brother or something. I felt like a third wheel the whole time, and Jordan didn't even notice how awkward she was making it for me because she was too focused on Mark. And that's not like Jordan at all. Usually, she's much more considerate and would immediately notice if I wasn't having a good time or if she was accidentally being rude and excluding someone at the table. It was jarring to sit there with her and Mark, feeling like I didn't know my girlfriend at all, as if he turned her into a completely different person who didn't even care I was alive. Finally, at one point when Jordan went to the bathroom, I just said to Mark, "So, are you into my girl or what's going on here?" Mark, "Nothing's going on at all. That ship sailed a long time ago." Me, "What does that mean? Did you guys date at some point?" Mark, "No, we never did. And when she left the church, we both knew it meant we were never going to. We've accepted being in each other's lives as friends. There's nothing else going on at all." Me, "That makes it sound like the only reason you're not together is because she left the church." All Mark did was shrug. Me, "Well, what if she came back to the church? Would you marry her?" Mark, "Oh, she's not going to do that. You might as well ask what would happen if a bicycle had 6 tires." When Jordan came back, Mark said to her, "He wants to know if we'd be married if you weren't a godless heathen." Jordan, "Why, did you two call your mom while I was gone?" Then she and Mark both just laughed about it and changed the subject. Because of dinner, that conversation, and everything else I've said here, I really feel like Jordan and Mark are in love with each other and not just best friends as they claim. The only reason they aren't together is because they can't compromise about religion. I think Jordan expects me to be okay with being her second choice because she's okay with it. In the meantime, I think she secretly wants to be with Mark. So, I'm wondering if I should just have self-respect and break up with her because I shouldn't be in a relationship with someone who would rather be with someone else. But then the problem is our relationship has been so perfect, and Jordan has always treated me well except for this one night. She's only ever acted this way on the one occasion Mark was physically around. Normally, even when she's talking to him all the time, she's never made me feel this way. So, on one hand, I'm wondering if maybe it doesn't matter what Jordan's feelings are for Mark. As long as he isn't around, it doesn't seem to affect our relationship. Maybe I just need to cool off and go back to trusting her that they're only friends, even if it seems true that their feelings for each other are complicated? Or should I just end things? Relevant comments. Comment 1. I may get some hate for this, but I'm a girl whose best friend is a guy, and I don't even do more than give him a quick hug before we part after hanging out. That may just be me, but I couldn't imagine holding hands and touching foreheads, especially if my so was there. How does growing up with someone equate to needing to hold hands or touch forearms, etc.? To me, that comes off as disrespectful. That said, I do believe the best thing to do is talk to her. Ignoring it won't get you anywhere, and I admit that the way I view things doesn't necessarily mean that's the way she viewed it or was trying to be flirtatious. The only way to work through things in a relationship is by letting your partner know how you feel in situations. If you don't discuss things that make you uncomfortable, you won't have a solid foundation for your relationship. I wish you all the best and hope you can work things out. Comment 2. I mean, the only way forward at this point is to talk to your girlfriend. You need to sit down and have a frank discussion about what made you uncomfortable that night. How she responds will tell you almost everything you need to know. I would be concerned that your girlfriend might quickly brush off your concerns without hearing you out. If she does that, you need to push back. Make it clear that you need to be heard on this issue and that she needs to take you seriously. Tell her that her actions with Mark were not only inappropriate but hurtful to you. Establish boundaries. Be explicit, the hand-holding, pressing their foreheads together, this goes far beyond what best friends do. Frame the conversation around that. What you do next depends on her reaction. I can see it going two ways. She may not have realized what she was doing in that environment. She was in a weird church cult for a decent chunk of her life, so it's possible she sees that behavior as normal and not concerning. That doesn't excuse it, but it could alleviate some of your concerns. She might go on the defensive, claiming you're exaggerating, being jealous, or that's just how their relationship is. If she responds defensively, that tells you more or less what you need to know. Either way, you need to talk to her, and she needs to understand that her actions were inappropriate. It might be tempting to sweep this under the rug if she tries to laugh it off. After all, how often are you going to interact with Mark in the future? But if you're considering a long-term relationship with her, you need to think about the long term. If you get married, do you really want to commit yourself to someone you believe would drop you for someone else in a heartbeat? Response. Thanks for this comment, it gives me a lot to think about. A couple of people have mentioned that her behavior around Mark might have a different context than I initially thought, given how they grew up. That doesn't mean I should just let it go without telling her that it bothered me, but perhaps she didn't realize that it didn't seem normal. It may not be as much of a sign of something deeper as I had thought. So, I might start by bringing it up with her, which I think could be a good idea. Comment 3. She obviously carrying a torch that will never go out. If knowing your runner-up is something you can live with, give it a shot, but 2 years isn't long and there's a lot of years left. If something changes later and an opportunity opens up, she'd go running. Response. That's the big thing that scares me, because I do think that I could maybe live with the fact that there was someone else before me and that she eventually did choose me over him. But then I think about what could happen if Mark decided that he was ever going to leave the church like Jordan did, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen from the way they both talk about it, but then I know that I'm a different person now at 29 than I was when I was 26, so it's not impossible for him to change his mind. And then if that really was the only reason that Jordan was with me, of course she'd leave to go be with him like what she always wanted. Update 1. I talked to Jordan on Wednesday night. I didn't break up with her. After we talked about everything, I realized breaking up would have been an overreaction based on what's actually going on. I still think I was right to be upset about what I saw at dinner on Saturday, and Jordan didn't disagree with me. However, I jumped to the wrong conclusion by thinking it meant she secretly wanted to be with Mark more than she wanted to be with me. Now that we've talked it out, I don't see any reason to end what's otherwise the best relationship I've ever had. I'm glad I didn't immediately trust my instincts because there was more to the situation that I didn't fully understand, but Jordan has since explained it. I now feel that she deserves some grace in this situation, assuming nothing like this happens again. So, thanks for the advice, especially to everyone who told me to talk to her before making a big decision. When we talked, I decided to follow the main piece of advice I received from everyone. I told Jordan that my feelings were hurt by the way she treated me at dinner with Mark, and then I waited to see how the conversation would go from there. It turned into a long discussion, so I won't try to remember exact quotes and risk getting them wrong, but here are the key points. I reiterated some of what I had said in the post, saying I felt excluded by her and Mark, especially since they were overly touchy-feely with each other to the point of making me uncomfortable. Jordan seemed surprised, as though she hadn't even noticed they were touching each other that much, but after thinking about it, she agreed with me and apologized. She explained that Mark is naturally touchy with everyone, not just her, I asked, so she didn't think anything of it. She added that she wished I had said something at the time because she hadn't realized how obnoxious they were being. I told her that part of what bothered me was that, under normal circumstances, I believed she would have noticed something like that. She was acting so differently around Mark and paying so little attention to anything else, including how I was feeling, that it made me question whether she cared more about him or had feelings for him beyond friendship. Jordan apologized again, saying she could understand why it seemed that way to me. She reassured me that she loves me and cares more about me than anyone else in the world, and she didn't mean to act that way or make me feel that way. She was trying to make sure Mark didn't feel like a third wheel since he was the only single person in a group with a couple, but she acknowledged that her efforts backfired, making me feel like the third wheel instead. Jordan then explained her history with Mark. She admitted that she cares about him more than she does for a typical friend, but not in a romantic way. That's why she always refers to him as her best friend instead of just friend. She mentioned that she would describe him as like a brother if not for the fact that she once had an actual brother, R.I.P., and she doesn't use that phrasing for anyone else. According to Jordan, the reason they became so close is that when she was 17, she tried ending it. At that time, everyone else in her community stopped talking to her, except for Mark, who was the only one who stayed by her side. For the next few years until she moved, Mark was literally her only friend, and he checked on her every day to make sure she stayed living. This is also when they started the habit of talking on the phone so frequently. During this time, Mark's parents thought they were dating and made a big deal about it, which is why she made that comment during dinner. Apparently, godless heathen was something Mark's mom had called her. I also mentioned to Jordan that Mark had basically told me he thought they would have gotten married if she had stayed in the church, and I asked if she thought Mark might be in love with her, even if she didn't feel the same way. She said, without hesitation, that he wasn't, and I don't think she was being dishonest. I don't necessarily agree with her, but I believe she genuinely thinks Mark isn't interested in her beyond friendship. She said that from her perspective, if she had never left the church or moved away, she and Mark might have ended up getting married, but only due to peer pressure, and she doesn't think it would have been a good thing. In her opinion, Mark was simply being honest about his thoughts, and from his perspective, he likely assumes they would have made a good couple, as he's envisioning her as the perfect church wife in that scenario. The big moment in our conversation came when Jordan told me that Mark was passing through our city again on his way home from this trip. She had planned to invite him to hang out with us again but said that if I felt uncomfortable with him being around, she wouldn't invite him. Many people said that if she didn't offer to cut down on contact with him, it meant she valued him over me. However, the fact that she brought up on her own that she wouldn't invite him again if I didn't want her to seemed like a good sign to me. Based on what she told me, I understand why she didn't offer to cut him out of her life completely, and I wouldn't expect her to after hearing about their history. In conclusion, I've decided to trust Jordan's explanation that although she and Mark are unusually close, it's for the reasons she shared and not because she's in love with him. I think it's a good sign that she apologized immediately instead of becoming defensive, and her explanation made sense to me. While I don't entirely trust Mark, I do trust Jordan. That said, I'll be keeping an eye on whether she continues talking to him as frequently as before if anything seems different. I'm not going to be controlling and tell her she can't talk to him or that she should limit their contact, but I want to see if our conversation leads to any changes in how she interacts with him. I suspect she might realize on her own that Mark's behavior towards her seems more than friendly now that I've pointed it out, but I'm not sure. Things might go back to how they were before, and I won't know if anything has really changed until Mark is around in person again. However, I don't think it's something I need to keep worrying about until that happens. Relevant comment. I'm not going to comment on your situation specifically, since others have already covered that in detail. However, here's something I think you should consider. The single most important skill we possess in evaluating relationships is objectivity. Unfortunately, it's also one of the first things we lose when our brain starts firing off love chemicals for someone. Objectivity is critical because it allows us to separate truth from falsehood and make fact-based decisions in situations that are often clouded by emotion. The true test of whether you've lost objectivity is to ask yourself, honestly, if you want the truth as much, or more, than the ideal outcome. In romantic relationships, we often want to believe someone, and that desire can undermine objectivity. When we want to believe someone, we risk convincing ourselves of what we want to believe. The goal in making decisions, especially in relationships, should be to find the truth. However, sometimes the truth conflicts with what we want, and when we choose what we want over the truth, we've officially lost our objectivity and can no longer make sound decisions about the relationship. I feel like, at least as an internet stranger, although I don't know your relationship as well as you do, if at all, I do have the ability to be unbiased and can see things clearly from the outside. I'm able to do that strictly because I can look at the facts of the situation and assess them without emotional interference. I also have the ability to separate your situation from my own, and I believe I can avoid projecting my fears or wounds onto your situation, so I don't skew my advice by making it about me. I say all of this because, as an unbiased observer, it seems like you are pushing yourself to believe in the outcome you are hoping for rather than the truth. Who knows, they might be the same thing. But from an outside perspective, it seems like you are being manipulated to some extent and are struggling to see it because you've lost your objectivity when it comes to your girlfriend. I could be totally wrong about that, that's just what it seems like from where I'm standing. So, my advice to you is to ask yourself this. Do I want a preferable outcome more than I want the truth? Be really honest with yourself about that. If you don't think my instinct is accurate, you can disregard it. But if, upon reflection, you feel like you're more willing to believe what you want rather than the truth, then I'd encourage you to review the whole thing internally. Look at the facts of your situation, the meal with the three of you as well as the discussion you had with her afterward, through the lens of, okay, do I just want to believe XYZ, or do I think there's a conflict between what she's telling me and what the facts say? It's incredibly difficult to remain objective when we have strong feelings for someone, not just in wanting to believe in a hopeful outcome versus the truth, but also in situations where, for example, someone made a bad first impression on us. Oftentimes, we will hold that against them and root for them to fail, when the reality is that this person is good and deserves good things, they just made a bad first impression. Hopefully, this makes sense and helps you see the situation from a less biased perspective. Response: that's a really well thought out comment, and I appreciate you taking the time to say it. I absolutely understand why everyone thinks I'm just letting Jordan gaslight me. Honestly, I'd probably think the same thing if someone else were telling me this story, so I can't really blame anyone. But I truly don't think I'm just being led by wanting to believe her. It's hard to convey everything that happened when we talked in one post, but I'm very sure she was being genuine, and that's what convinced me to believe her. It wasn't that I stopped being objective because it was easier. Honestly, it would have been easier to keep assuming that what I thought initially was true because, in a way, it's easier for me to understand. I do think Jordan's attachment to Mark is weird and probably unhealthy, and even if she doesn't think so, I believe there's more than just friendship going on from his side. But I think Jordan is being honest when she says she's not in love with him and that she wants to be with me, not him. That was what made me question the relationship. The other issues I still take with the situation can be worked out, as long as Jordan takes seriously that she can't act in a way with Mark that disrespects me and our relationship, even if, in her head, it's not romantic. Based on how our talk went, I think I can trust her to do so. Update 2. The situation seems pretty resolved now, after Mark and Jordan had an argument over everything and are no longer friends. What happened was that, after Jordan told Mark we weren't available to hang out when he came back through our city, he blamed me, saying he could tell Jordan was only saying no because I had a problem with him. Jordan admitted that was part of the reason and told Mark she wanted a bit of space from him out of respect for our relationship. Mark got really offended and kept asking Jordan to explain why his presence was disrespectful, pretending not to understand her answers. Eventually, during the conversation, he started guilt-tripping Jordan into making time for him and told her she'd become a worse person over the years, saying that Jordan he knew would never blow him off. That upset Jordan a lot because she interpreted it as Mark saying she was a bad person for leaving the church. She started crying and ended up hanging up on him. Jordan and I talked a lot afterward. I told her I thought Mark was toxic because anyone else would have been understanding of what she said. Jordan mentioned that much of what he said reminded her of being in the church. She couldn't quite explain it, except to say it was his attitude when he argued with her, and it made her not want to talk to him anymore, even outside of anything related to our relationship. The next day, Mark texted Jordan, asking if she really wasn't going to see him and if she was going to choose some boyfriend over her only friend, after everything he'd been through with her. Jordan explained again that their friendship couldn't be the same now that she was with someone, and he should understand that. Mark responded, saying he couldn't believe she'd treat her best friend like that. Jordan tried to reply, pointing out that a true friend wouldn't guilt-trip her, but by then, he had already blocked her number. After that, Jordan felt like she'd done something wrong and had been too harsh with Mark, but we talked it through again, and she realized she was right not to want to be friends with Mark if he was going to treat her like she owed him loyalty. Jordan then blocked him on all her social media accounts, so if he changes his mind and tries to apologize, she can ignore him. A couple of weeks went by, and while I'll admit I was relieved not to hear from Mark, Jordan was really bummed about how everything ended. She said that even though she now realized Mark wasn't good for her, his reaction to her setting boundaries brought back the same feelings of abandonment she had as a teenager when her church friends turned their backs on her. At that point, I asked if she'd ever considered therapy for religious trauma. She told me she had gone for a few months when she first left the church, but the therapist hadn't been helpful. I suggested that it might be worth trying again with a different therapist because it seemed like this still bothered her. Jordan agreed and made an appointment. She's had a couple of therapy sessions so far, and she says they're going well, but I don't ask her for details, so I can't provide much more of an update on that part of the situation. Thanks for the help, everyone. The Tattletale. It's been 8 months since the last update. It's likely that this was the end of the story, but you never know, Mark might return.